The views and opinions expressed on the following program may not necessarily reflect the views of the staff, management, or board of Hope Media Group and KSBJ. It's what's happening around us, in our town, suburb, city, in our community. It's Community Beat with Kim Kasi McKee on 89.3 KSBJ.
Hello and welcome to Community Beat, where we're keeping you tuned into the topics that are impacting our local communities and helping them thrive. I'm your host, Kim Kasi McKee. Today, we're raising awareness for an organization that helps women and children around the world who are victims of sex trafficking. Our guest today is Kirby Trapolino, who's founder and executive director for Peace Gospel International. Welcome, Kirby, and thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you. So happy to be here. Thanks so much.
So, Kirby, for starters, tell us about yourself and a little bit about you, and then how you became involved with Peace Gospel International.
Okay, yeah. So it's quite an amazing story of God's providence and His hand in my life. I signed up to go on a mission trip service project when I was 17 with a group called Teen Missions International, and a wonderful organization that had a vision for getting youth involved in cross-cultural outreach and in service. And I fell in love with the organization as a teenager. And when they started putting out appeals for leaders to sign up to go to volunteer for these teenage teams, I was in college and I said, yeah, I loved my leaders when I was on my team that was in Eastern Europe. And so I said, yeah, I want to do that. So I signed up, and they had an application, and they asked, what kind of countries are you interested? Which teams would you be interested in serving on? And they allowed you to put 5 countries. And on the bottom of the list, I put India. Wow. I didn't know anything about India, but I just thought, well, that would be interesting. I had a friend who had been on the India team the year before, 2 or 3 years prior. I imagined them in the meeting room with all the applications, got like, we need a guy leader on the India team, because all the women want to be the next Mother Teresa, I guess, was kind of the thing. They had all these girls there, these women that wanted these positions in India, and I imagined them in the meeting, like shuffling throughout all that. We need a guy who put India. Wow, here's one. Let's take him. And so I was the only male leader that was not on the national staff there, and my summer in 1993 in India just completely changed my life. It was had never experienced anything like that. And that kind of began my journey to responding to the Great Commission in terms of Jesus saying, go and make disciples of all the nations, and having this real passion for understanding other cultures and people from different backgrounds. And I just realized I loved talking with people from different cultural backgrounds. And so, and I was age 20 when I went and spent my summer in India. So, and I turned 21 over there. And so from that age, I just knew that was somehow, I had no idea, but I knew somehow that was going to be a part of my life. Interesting, we're here at KSBJ. I also had a passion for faith-inspired, Christian-oriented music, because I love music, but in my newfound faith around that age, I was hungry for something that would feed me spiritual and not just be ear candy, you know? And so I had a real interest in Christian music from a young age, and I started a Christian record label here in Houston called Grassroots Music. Wow. And so that's sort of my career background. For 10 years, I did that. We worked with great artists like Caedmon's Call and Andrew Peterson, Bebo Norman, and some others, some people who listened to Christian music back in the 90s and early 2000s might remember. And Andrew Peterson, of course, is still going strong.
Yes.
I kept in touch with the people that I had met in India that summer.
Okay.
And yet I came back and I started this record label. And so I used part of the profits from the record label to fund a new initiative that I started in India with an orphan home and outreaching to children who had come out of human trafficking. Really just realized I had a passion for that. And so while running this record label, I would also visit India, and we started the charity at that point, Peace Gospel International. For the first 15 years, that's what we did, was we worked in India with trafficking survivors and orphans. As you might imagine I have a bit of an entrepreneurial bent to start my own record label.
Of course.
So one of the things that I was always interested in was helping the native team there, our local team in India, be empowered so that it wasn't always just about, hey, we raised this much money and we're just going to wire it over and that's it.
Sure.
Right? Because my heart was always burdened when we didn't have enough to send over and it was going to be a struggle for the children, right? And in our programs. So I always encouraged them and worked with them to start small businesses.
Okay.
And so we, our first small business that was successful, we tried a bunch of things, but oddly enough was a water buffalo dairy farm. So apparently that's where, you know, in India, that's where they get a lot of their dairy is from water buffaloes.
Oh my goodness.
And
meeting a practical need.
Yeah. And it was a successful business. And so that started a long tradition in our organization of always, when we partner with a new local organization or local ministry, work to make sure that there's something sustainable there to lift them up rather than just hand out, right?
That's awesome.
Yeah. So
something more sustainable.
Right. And so that's a big part of what Peace Gospel is about, is empowering local leaders in the church communities and their areas to feel really empowered and strengthened. And it gives them dignity too, that they're not just always waiting for the next grant to be wired over.
Sure.
And they can feel proud, like, wow, well, we raised this much from our own efforts. And then there's sometimes where they'll just tell me, like, hey, we bought this new set of desks for one of the classrooms from the farmland profits. And I'll be like, praise God,
Wow.
So it's working, it's really neat.
That is awesome.
Yeah.
Well, Kirby, your story is absolutely fascinating to hear that you went on your first mission trip as a leader when you were 20 years old. You happened to select India as the place that you wanted to go. And then you go there and something happens that is so compelling for you that you never really left.
True. That's a great way of saying it. Yes. Left my heart in India.
What was that first trip like? What was it?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Created such a hook in your heart like that.
Yeah, I think a lot of it was just goodness, seeing the local believers there and their humility and their poverty and their, and just their gratitude, for everything that God was calling them to do, and feeling a part of his mission on earth. And so I was very impressed with the local Christian community in India.
Wow.
But also very impressed with just the Indian people, their hospitality in welcoming, all these foreigners into their community. That we were quite a sight to see. We had 31 teenagers from Canada and the United States, just show up in this small town in South Asia. Also understanding people living in extreme poverty definitely have so many struggles in terms of like health and disease and malnourishment, but their hearts are so rich and so full because they realize more so than a lot of us what a blessing is when they see it. You know what I mean? And so they don't take anything for granted. And so when I'll just never forget, being in a slum colony there, and you walk up and the people will pull out a chair or a little mat for you to sit, and they're like welcoming you in, and they'll make you a little cup of chai,
such
tea,
as they have,
right? Whatever they have, and I've just seen that, in all my travels. So yeah, it was a summer that I just completely changed my whole view of the world.
Sure.
I had seen poverty in some places like Mexico and Jamaica and some different places I had the blessing of getting to travel to at a younger age, but this was the first time I had seen it on such a broad scale. And just the sheer number of the population and the population density in these cities in South Asia are just staggering. And so, yeah, part of the story that kind of ties it all together is, our kids had learned drama and songs in the local dialect there.
Okay.
And they just did a wonderful job. And so it was like, and we were working, it was a work project primarily. We were helping to build and construct an orphan home in this area.
When you say our kids, the kids who had come on the mission trip.
Right, this team in 1993.
Okay.
So yeah. it was like a Friday night, and we had been working hard all week, but the local leader with the group that we were with, a man native to India, came and asked me, hey, we've got this pastor that we've befriended, and he has a little outreach in this slum colony. Would you like to go do your presentation? And we were already cleaning up from dinner. We were exhausted. It's like, it's like summer in India. It's super hot.
Goodness, I can only imagine.
Right. And so I said, okay, well, this is why we're here. We want to welcome people into the idea and the message of the gospel, right? Which is good news. And that's the whole point of the Great Commission is we're here to try to bring people in and let them hear the good news of Jesus Christ. Right. So we went into that a little squatters colony, slum colony. And there was this young pastor who had his church gathered under a tree in the middle of this shanty village with a light bulb hanging from a branch, and everyone was gathered, and they had like little percussion instruments, and they were singing praises in their own native language. And I remember meeting this young pastor and just this, like chills all over my body, like, because they told me his age, and we were the same age. I was like, how is it? He'd already been to Bible college and like been called in to plant this little
20
church.
20 years old. Yeah. Amazing.
That was just an unforgettable night.
Yes.
And here he was trying to minister to the poor and bring them a sense of, it struck me like that's what church is in essence, is trying to create community and support and encouragement and teaching and discipleship. And here this guy was literally doing it amongst the poorest of the poor.
Wow.
And you could see, like, as they were singing and playing their percussion instruments, like the joy that otherwise, imagine if you were walking through there and that wasn't there, and what you would sense, it would be like more of like oppression, and you would feel sad.
Right.
But here was bringing the joy of the Lord into this poor community. And so I was just really impressed. And he and I stayed friends. He didn't speak any English, but we stayed in touch, and I would see him come to our where we were based. This young pastor and I became friends and started an airmail correspondence when I got home.
Wow.
And I said, I don't know what it is, but I just know and I feel that I'm supposed to help you. And so he would get that translated, and then he would go in town and have somebody translate it and airmail back the English. And so then I sponsored him to go to a university in Bangalore where he learned English.
Okay.
And so he spent 6 months there in an immersion course, and he picked up English real fast.
Wow.
And then I said, hey, let's start something together. Because he had this unbelievable story where he was rescued from slavery as a fatherless orphan himself. He had been, a deal had been, a nefarious deal had been worked out with his mother to sell him into slavery in exchange for food.
Wow.
Like a 20-kilo bag of rice was what he was, the trade was.
Wow.
But he escaped that and got out. And so that story, I was like, I wanted to know more about, like, is that still going on? You know, it was so shocking. Yes. And so that's when I first became aware of even that modern day slavery was still a thing, right?
Okay.
And so that's
it was a very pivotal strategic connection that God had to make.
So then that's when I said, we've got to start a little home for these children as they're escaping. You know, we need a place for them to be cared for and nurtured. And so that's in the early 90s, we started our first orphan home for boys and girls who had come out of trafficking, mostly labor trafficking.
Okay.
That's a big part of the human trafficking crisis is labor, basically it's just slavery, is what it is. And I could tell you countless stories about how, what the tactics are and how what they do is it's sort of predatory. They will go into these poor communities and loan money to these families. They're so desperate, and they take it, and they're not educated, so they don't understand the repayment terms and the legal aspect of it. And then they threaten them, and they say, well, we'll take your children and work. They can work in our factories, and that will forgive your debt. And so they're so intimidated, and so
they're vulnerable.
There's a lot of situations like that. Of course, sex trafficking is another big part of the problem. So that's how Peace Gospel International was founded, with my partner there. He's still directing our programs there in South Asia. So
incredible.
Yeah. And then so we did that for the first 15 years. We were only in India. But then God started opening doors for us to take the model of what we had learned in South Asia, equipping and empowering our partners with farmland enterprises and small business enterprises. As people started to hear the story, they would approach me, hey, I met this guy when I was on a mission trip in Uganda or in the Philippines.
Okay.
Or what? Could you just write him a little encouragement? And so we took that, and we, at first what just started as me sending a few emails of like, hey, I met your friend who told me her story about meeting you and this and that, and was more of like trying to give them advice. But then we started to see the opportunity to equip these pastors and their wives who, in all of these cases, what's just a beautiful, mind-blowing awareness for your listeners is that there's, in the developing world, I feel like they read the scriptures and they say, and they're young pastors in ministry, right? And they're like, well, they're so zealous to want to do God's will,
right?
That they read, well, it says here we're supposed to take care of orphans and widows.
So they take it literally.
True. What does it say? Religion that's true and undefiled before God is taking care of orphans and widows in their distress.
Yes.
And so they look, and so literally have all these stories of these pastors who, when we met them, lived in just super humble homes, but had adopted like 8-9 children they were taking care of as their own. And so like in our Uganda program with our pastor there, when I met them and I got to finally visit in Uganda, we were staying in this tiny house where all these orphans were living with the family, and they had like, literally their electricity was a car battery that had the wires running in for like 2 light bulbs, and they had a battery-powered radio, and then an outhouse. And so we raised money, we built them a new orphan home, and we bought some land, we bought a farmland, and now in Uganda, we have a boarding high school with over 400 students, and like 300 of them are orphans that we're taking care of year-round. And then we have a rural primary school with almost 600 students.
Wow.
And we have a girls' home on that same campus. And so I think it's just a tribute to and a testimony of God honoring that kind of faith of like that just childlike faith. Well, the scripture says we're supposed to take care of orphans. So we don't know where the money's going to come from, Lord, but we're going to do it. And then God, coming in and providing through this. So
wow. If you're just tuning in, we're speaking with Kirby Trapolino, who's the founder and executive director for Peace Gospel International. So Kirby, just for someone who may be just tuning in, what is Peace Gospel International?
Sure. So we exist to empower local leadership in the developing world, Christian local leadership that is trying to follow God's calling to be what is known as the repair of a broken world. In Hebrew thought, it's called the Tikkun Olam, which was, if you read in Leviticus, reserving the corners of the fields for the poor. And all of that was for the idea is to repair a broken world. So the gospel is yes, teaching about the redemption of Jesus Christ and the forgiveness and the hope and the resurrection that we've just experienced on Easter, right? That's the gospel, but also then the gospel has its ramifications.
That's right.
When people start to follow God's heart, they start to build things up and not tear things down.
Yes.
Right. And so that's what the whole idea is, that Peace Gospel is this idea of bringing peace and order to communities that previously only had strife and disorder. And so the gospel, therefore, is like actually making a tangible impact of building communities up. And so through that is a big part of that is education.
Sure.
So we not only focus on rescuing, but also restoring. So like we rescue orphans and sex trafficking survivors, labor trafficking survivors, and bring them through rehabilitation. But then we want to equip them, right? So we have trade schools, we have primary schools, high schools, all trying to give them the dignity and the pride that they would have never otherwise had this chance to hold a diploma. That would be something for the rich kids in the city. That's just like a pipe dream. But here we have all these schools and trade schools where you have, like at our trade school in Kathmandu in Nepal is for trafficking survivors, young girls from 16 to 21 usually. Coming out of sex trafficking, and finding rehabilitation, and then being equipped with the tailoring trade. So they learn all the different patterns of the clothing, and they, by the end of their coursework, they can, by memory, draw the diagram and the measurements of each pattern, and then they can make the clothes. And so they go back to their home villages and show this diploma that they got in the city, you know, and the whole family is just so impressed. Whereas,
of course,
you know, there's otherwise a lot of potential for shame from what they came out of. And so we're lifting them up. And so that's a big part. So our human trafficking response programs are called She Has Hope.
Yes.
So we have Peace Gospel International, but then a lot of what people know us by is She Has Hope. And so you can go to shehashope.org or peacegospel.org and learn more about us. And, you know, just pray for us. And we appreciate it. It's a lot of spiritual. There's a big spiritual battle out there.
Absolutely.
And so,
in fact, I know She Has Hope has something very special coming up later this month. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So thank you. We are going to have our annual gala. It's going to be at Ecclesia Houston Church downtown.
Okay.
On April 18th, Thursday 18th. We have like 20 tickets left as of right now.
Okay.
And we're really blessed and excited and honored to have Rudy Tomjanovich is going to be our special guest, and he's going to be there for, you know, just to meet people, and we're just so grateful to have his support, and so it's a big celebration for everything that God is doing, and we'll look at some of the achievements and what we've been able to do together. You know, and that's what it's all about. It's about coming together, because you and I individually, it's like kind of like it's such a huge crisis. You could just feel overwhelmed and like, well, what's my little contribution going to do?
Right.
So that's a problem, because it's a real factor that I think a lot of people hear the lie that, well, I love what they're doing, but what's my little contribution going to do? And so it turns into kind of a bit of apathy of like. And so people don't give because they feel like it won't make an impact.
Would it make?
Right. And so one of my big mantras is like, if we come together and overcome indifference, we can make a difference.
Oh, that's great.
You know, and so that's what I really feel like part of the gala is about, like coming together to look at everybody else in the room and go like, wow, we look at the presentation and we give God, you know, glory of like, look at what he's done through us, just his humble servants, you know, making a difference in the world. Because there is so much darkness in our world. And for the believer, it can be very discouraging. And you feel like, how is God allowing all this darkness to prevail, right? It's like a constant question. But I feel like the answer is he's given us all the commandments to go and repair a broken world. And a lot of it's from disobedience.
Sure.
And we just are saying, well, woe is us. What can we do? We're powerless. And so we gotta overcome that kind of thinking, right? And say, no, we are empowered. We do. He who is in us is greater than he who is in the world.
That's right.
And so we do have the power to make a difference when we come together. And so that's kind of what our gala is all about. Yeah.
So for those who may be interested in coming to the gala, where should they go?
Shehashope.org. And right when you land the big splash banner there, you can just click on it, and that's to get to info about our gala.
So tell us, what are some of the ways that you raise awareness for trafficking in Houston?
For several years now, we do what we call our pop-up shop. And we go to different markets and different festivals, and whoever will take us, we'll come and we'll set up a little booth. Okay. And we'll feature some of the products that our girls make in our trade schools.
Oh, excellent.
And sell those as partly it's a fundraiser, but more so to have a conversation.
Sure.
So the crafts, you know, maybe only raise like 1% of our annual budget. So it's not really about that, but it's such a great piece to own one of the products and be able to pass it on to a friend. Let me tell you about this group that I heard of, She Has Hope. They had this great pop-up, and I also learned about human trafficking, and you start conversations.
Okay.
So it's more about having a conversation, and in that conversation at our pop-up shops, we also try to educate people too. Yeah, you would expect that it's an international problem in the developing world, but it's also happening right here in our own backyard.
That's right.
And so we use that as kind of an entree into the conversation about human trafficking, and try to get people aware of what the crisis really is. And so that's a big part of what we do. And we have info cards and things that help people, you know, just sort of be aware of like red flags to look for, and
Good.
the 800 number to call for tips on suspicions you might have about someone that could be in the process of being trafficked or a trafficking victim.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, there's a lot of great conversations that we have at our pop-up shops.
Okay.
And so you can find a schedule of those upcoming pop-up shops on our website at shehashope.org.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So what are some ways, do you utilize volunteers? And if so, what are some of
Yes.
the ways that they can serve your cause?
Yes, right. Great question. And for sure, all the time, we need volunteers at our pop-up shops.
Okay.
So, getting there early to help us set up, having conversations with the people that show up, or just if you're a behind-the-scenes person, just kind of being on hand to, refresh the products or whatever it is that we would need you to help out with.
Great.
And then also in gala season, like we are now, like come to Ecclesia on April 18th afternoon and help us set up. There's always things like that and different fundraisers that need support. But again, on shehashope.org, we have a volunteer page that you can look at, and it all definitely makes a difference. And
Sure.
we just appreciate all hands on deck whenever we need the hands, for sure.
And how can we be praying for you and your ministry in the days ahead?
Yeah, that's so sweet of you to ask. I think again, it's like we do have to be cognizant. I feel that we are in a spiritual battle,
Sure.
and so the prayer cover really makes a difference in my opinion. And really, just I think a lot of it is that there is a need for provision for these. These programs. We're caring for almost 1,500 women and children day in and day out in 5 different countries. So we're in the
Wow.
Philippines, Myanmar, Nepal, India, and Uganda, and this requires a lot of funding. The miracle of it is that we are able to multiply donor funds in the field through our farmland enterprises, and that provides for. Last year, we served over 1 million meals.
Wow.
It just, you don't think about it, but like 1,500 people getting 3 meals a day, and a lot of these cases, in different school programs and residential care adds up to like, wow, well, we're able to grow a lot of our food, but it's still not enough. We need support.
Sure.
So financial provision is a big prayer request. Really, though, pray for the girls and children who are coming out of a lot of trauma.
Yes.
Just unfathomable for you and me to ever imagine what that would be like. Praying for their healing,
Yes.
praying for their restoration. It's heartbreaking to learn and realize, what a lot of these girls have gone through. And so we need that supernatural rebirth and healing that can only come from Jesus, right?
Yes.
So that's a big one. I would say those would be and then also just protection for our staff working in a lot of times in regions of the world where these situations are very tenuous and very precarious, and there's a lot of persecution. And so just safety and protection. And in Myanmar right now, and for those of you who aren't geography buffs, Myanmar is formerly known as Burma. It's in between India and Thailand. There's a civil war going on there right now. And we have several orphan homes there that now are facing the regime that's in power has instated a draft, and they're taking children as young as 17, and 17 and 18-year-olds are being conscripted into the army. For our orphan homes, we're very concerned about some of our older children being taken off into,
Sure.
And so there's
Of
just
course.
a lot of things we just can't even fathom what
That's
that would
right.
be like, and the stress that they're under. And so protection and pray for all of us, and just wisdom for us as a leadership team at Peace Gospel to know how we can best respond to the trafficking crisis, and how we can continue to spread the word and educate Houstonians to what it is we're doing. People in the Houston area. I know your radio waves probably reach further than Houston, so I don't want to be
Sure. Throughout the greater Houston
ignorant
area.
to that. Yeah,
Definitely.
yeah, exactly.
Awesome. Well, you've given us a lot to pray for, and we will absolutely be praying for you and Peace Gospel. And we're celebrating just
amen.
the amazing work and your faithfulness to this calling for over 30 years.
Yes, thank you.
Just
Thank you.
absolutely incredible. And so, again, we want to say thank you for joining us today.
And thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Absolutely. We've been honored to have Kirby Trapolino, the founder and executive director of Peace Gospel International. And to learn more about Peace Gospel International or She Has Hope, the gala that's coming up next week, you can go to peacegospel.org and also shehashope.org.
That's right. Thank you so much.
And as always, thank you to our wonderful audience for joining us. And we hope you'll tune in again next week for another edition of Community Beat. I'm Kim Kasi McKee on 89.3 KSBJ.
Thanks for joining us for Community Beat with Kim Kasi McKee. Join us every Saturday morning at 5:30 on 89.3 KSBJ.